You can have the gas station, Mama, Wesley said, sliding the deed across the lawyer's polished table like a man brushing crumbs off a cloth. We didn't figure you'd want the junk. Edith Calloway picked up the pen and signed her name. No argument. No tears for the two of them to watch. None of the people at that table knew what they were doing. Not the son who slid the paper to her. Not the daughter scrolling on her phone beside him. Not even the lawyer reading it all out loud. That worthless little gas station was worth more than the house, the car, and the savings they were carving up. All three of them put together. They would learn that, so in her own time would she. She had kept Earl's books by hand for 41 years. Every gallon sold and every gasket bought, in a green ledger ruled off in her own neat columns. She could read a balance sheet faster than the young lawyer could find his place on the page. So she knew to the dollar what her children were taking from her that morning, and she knew to the dollar what they believed they were leaving her. Nothing. The lawyer's office smelled of toner and cold coffee. The big table had been polished so hard you could see the ceiling lights swimming in it, 2 long smears of white. Mr. Renner cleared his throat and read the way a man reads when he would rather be anyplace else. The house on Sycamore Street. New roof. Note paid off. Went to Wesley and Tammy to divide between them. The Buick, 3 years old, low miles, went to Tammy. The savings that Earl and Edith had set aside one careful winter at a time split clean down the middle. And then the station. Earl's Fuel and Service, Renner read. Corner of Mercer Road and Old State Highway 9, Harlan Springs. Structure, lot, and contents. He set the page down. I'll be straight with you, Mrs. Calloway. This firm advised against you taking it. There are most likely fuel tanks still in the ground out there. If the state ever orders them dug up, the cleanup can run past whatever the land is worth. The county carries the whole parcel on its books at $400. Even that is generous. It's worth less than nothing, Wesley said, and he smiled when he said it, pleased, like it was a clever thing he had thought up himself. That's the legal word, right? A liability. We had a fella drive out and look it over. He laughed at us. Tammy did not glance up from her phone. Her thumbs kept moving. Honestly, Mama, it's a kindness, she said. You do not want tank cleanup in your name at your age. Wesley and I already talked the whole thing through. This way, the ugly part stays with you, and you don't owe 1 cent to anybody. Edith folded her hands on the cold table and said nothing. Tammy was generous like that. It never cost her a thing. You could contest this, you know, Renner said, almost gently. The estate can be split other ways. It's your right to ask. There is nothing to contest, Tammy said, before her mother could draw a breath. She has a fixed income and a tank farm full of liability. We are doing her a favour. Edith turned the pen over once in her fingers. Your father pumped gas on that corner for 30 years, she said quietly. He put the both of you through school on it. And then it closed and it has been rotting out there for 15 years, Wesley said. Times change, Mama. Nobody buys a corner station off Highway 9 anymore. You ought to be glad we are not asking you to go halves on the clean-up. He laughed and looked at his watch, because he had a 2 o'clock in town and a new truck waiting to be sat in. What Tammy did not say out loud was that she had already borrowed against her half of the Sycamore house, $40,000, for a kitchen with an island and a stone counter the colour of wet ash. What Wesley did not say was that he had put a deposit down on a Range Rover the same week the will cleared probate, before the ink was dry on any of it. They were not dividing what their father left them. They were paying back money they had already gone out and spent. The scrap man offered us next to nothing for the pumps, Wesley went on, warming to it. Said he'd haul the metal off and call it square. We told him to keep his $100 and let you have the place. Sentimental value. He grinned at his sister. Dad would have liked that. Edith looked at her son a moment, at his clean, soft hands. Is that all of it? She asked. That's all of it. Wesley pushed one last thing across the polished wood to her. A single key, dark with age, hanging on a loop of dirty string. The key to Earl's. Sign the back page, and the junkyard's yours. She signed the back page. She picked up the key and put it down in the pocket of her denim jacket. The jacket she had owned longer than Wesley had been alive, and she buttoned the pocket shut so it could not fall out on the drive home. Renner looked almost sorry for her. The children only looked relieved. Not one soul in that room understood that the quiet old woman, buttoning her coat pocket, had just been handed the corner of Mercer Road, and every last thing that lay sleeping underneath it. She drove home in a borrowed pickup because the Buick belonged to Tammy now. 49 years she had been married to Earl Calloway. 2 children raised up in the house on Sycamore Street, the house that was no longer hers. The savings, halved. The car, gone. 72 years old. And the whole arithmetic of one life read out by a stranger and dealt around a table like a hand of cards, while her daughter answered text messages under the lip of it. What they had left her was a dead filling station on the worst corner of a town that had mostly quit pumping oil. 15 years dark, grass standing in the cracks of the pump island. A sign that had not lit since the boys who worked the night shift were young men. To them, that was the joke of the morning. That was the whole punchline. Here is the part none of them knew. For 15 years, every Sunday, Edith had driven out to that dead station all on her own. She had carried a key the entire time. She never told the children, because the children never asked. And after a while, a person stops offering what nobody wants to hear. Every Sunday after church, she drove the 11 miles out State Highway 9, turned at Mercer Road, and let herself into the little front office that still smelled faintly of motor oil and Earl's coffee. She swept it. The same square of cracked linoleum week after week, though no foot but her own ever crossed it. She wiped down the counter. She knocked the spiders out of the high corners with a rag tied to a broom handle. Out front, on a cedar post Earl had set in concrete the summer Wesley was born, she kept a bird feeder filled, cardinals mostly. A pair of them nested every spring in the hollow of the dead sign, and she counted it her plain duty to carry them through the winter. And once a year, in January, Edith walked into the Harlan County Courthouse and paid the property tax on Earl's fuel and service. $40 and change, in cash, at the recorder's window. The man behind that window, Dale Pruitt, had filed Earl's papers for 30 years, and he always took her 2 20s and counted her change without one nosy question. She never breathed a word of that tax to her children. It was not for them. It was for Earl. 15 years, and they never once wondered who kept the weeds cut back on a building they were so certain was garbage. They never drove out that way. Why would they? It was only Earl's, the old place on Mercer, the corner of Harlan Springs the rest of the town had learned to drive past without seeing. But Edith remembered a thing Earl had told her. Near the end, when his hands had begun to shake, and he had handed the green ledger over to her for good, he drove her out to the station on a Sunday, much like her Sundays now. He stood in the doorway of that little office and looked out at the rusted pumps the way some men look at the ocean. "I didn't leave you the pumps, Edie," he said. "I left you what's under them." She had thought it was just the soft sentiment of a tired man. She patted his arm and told him to come in out of the wind. "Count carefully," he said. "You promise me you'll count carefully," she promised. She had no earthly idea what she was promising, and then there were doctors and casseroles left on the porch, and a folded flag, and a thermos of his coffee she still could not bring herself to pour out, and his words slipped down underneath all of it and stayed there for 3 long years. There was one more thing too, a smaller thing, the kind a wife files away and forgets she ever kept. One winter, years before he took sick, Earl had spent a whole weekend out at the station with a box of nails and his good claw hammer. Fixing the back wall, he told her, the wall behind the cashier counter. When she carried him a ham sandwich at noon, he had been down on his knees back there, driving a panel tight against the studs, and he stood up too fast when he heard her come in, the way a man stands when he has been caught at something. She had not thought about that morning one single time in 20 years. The afternoon her children took everything, Edith did not drive back to the emptied house on Sycamore to pack her boxes. She drove the borrowed pickup out State Highway 9 instead, 11 miles, through the long gold light of a late Oklahoma afternoon, and she turned at Mercer Road. The station sat there dark the way it always sat. Earl's, the dead sign, the standing weeds, 2 cardinals fussing at a feeder that had gone empty while she was being robbed at a polished table back in town. But something was different now, and the different thing was her. For 15 years she had come out here, only to keep a dead man's place swept and tidy. This evening she came because 2 words would not leave her be: count carefully. She stood in the gravel with the old key already warm in her fist and looked at the little office, at the black window, at the low shape of the cashier counter she could just make out behind the glass. And behind that counter, the wall Earl had knelt down to nail shut. She had swept past it 500 Sundays and never once asked herself what it was hiding. Edith Calloway turned the key and pushed open the door and stepped inside to find out. The door gave with its same low groan, and the dark came up to meet her, cool and close and smelling of all the things it always smelled of. Cold motor oil gone down into the concrete, the dust of 15 shut-up years. And underneath it, faint as a memory, the coffee Earl used to perk on the hot plate in the corner. She had smelled that smell 500 Sundays. She had never once stood in it the way she stood in it now, with the will read out behind her, and her name signed on the back page, and her children driving home to houses and cars that used to be partly hers. She did not turn on a light. The power had been off out here since the year the pumps went quiet, and besides, the low gold sun was coming sideways through the dirty front window, and laying a long warm bar of it across the floor. She swept every week. Dust hung in that light, turning slow. The little office looked the way it always looked. The dead register, the metal stool, the calendar on the wall still turned to a month in a year. Long gone, a picture of a lake nobody around Harlan Springs had ever been to. Her broom stood where she had left it last Sunday, leaned in the corner with the rag still tied to the handle. And there, behind the counter, was the wall. She had wiped that wall down 100 times. She had run her dust rag along the top of the panelling and never given it a thought, because it was only a wall, the backside of a building her own children swore up and down was worth $1 of scrap metal. But she was looking at it now, the way Earl must have wanted her to look at it someday, and her eye went straight to the place she had never let it rest before. Down low, behind where the cashier stool sat, a panel of cheap brown board, 4 nails of it, set just a half shade proud of the boards on either side, the seam of it filled with the grey of old cork gone hard. 20 years fell away from her like a coat sliding off a hook. She saw it as plain as if it were happening in front of her again. A Saturday morning, cold, the wind working at the eaves. Earl out here the whole weekend with a box of nails and his good claw hammer, telling her he was shoring up the back wall before the damp got to the studs. She had come out at noon with a ham sandwich wrapped in waxed paper and a thermos, and she had found him down on his knees right there driving a panel tight, and he had stood up too quick when the door opened. Too quick and a little guilty, the way a man stands when his wife has caught him at a thing he had not meant her to see. He had wiped his hands on his trousers and taken the sandwich and walked her back out to the truck, talking the whole way about the weather, and she had thought nothing of it. Not that day, not for 20 years after. "Oh, Earl," she said out loud to the empty room. "What did you do?" She got down onto her knees on the cold linoleum, slow, one hand on the counter, the way a woman of 72 gets down onto a floor when she means to. Her knees did not thank her. She put her fingers to the seam of the panel and pressed, and it gave the smallest bit, a 1/4 inch of play, a hollow behind it. Not solid wall, not stud and damp and insulation. Hollow. She needed a tool, and she knew exactly where to find one, because in 15 years of sweeping this place, she had never once thrown out a single thing of Earl's. His toolbox was right where it had always been, under the counter, a grey steel box gone orange at the corners with rust. She dragged it out, and the weight of it was familiar in her arms, and she lifted the lid, and there on top, laid across the tray like he had set it down an hour ago, was his good claw hammer. The wood of the handle was dark and shining where his hand had worn it smooth across 30 years. The same hammer that had nailed the panel shut. Edith took it up. She fit the claw of it into the seam, and she leaned her weight on the handle. All of it. Every pound she had, and for a long moment nothing moved at all. Then the first nail let go with a screech that went right through the quiet. A long rusty cry, and she nearly went over backward. She caught herself on the counter and laughed. One short, surprised breath of a laugh. Alone in the dark with her dead husband's hammer in her hand, she set the claw to the next one, and the next. Her shoulders burned. A strand of silver hair came loose from her bun and stuck to her forehead, and she did not stop to push it back. 4 nails. The panel came away from the studs all at once with a crack, and she set it down flat on the floor, and she looked into the dark hollow of the wall. There was a box in there. It sat back in the cavity between the studs, a steel box about the size of a milk crate. Grey paint, a hinged lid, a handle folded down on the top of it. Heavier than it looked, she found, when she got both hands on the handle and drew it out into the bar of sunlight. It came grinding across the bottom of the cavity and out into her lap, and it was heavy the way only steel is heavy, and her arms shook holding it. She set it on the floor in the light and knelt over it and just looked at it a while, breathing, the dust she had stirred up turning gold in the air. all around her. It was not locked. There was a hasp, but no padlock through it. Earl had not hidden this thing from a thief. He had hidden it from time and from indifference, and from a world that had decided to drive past his corner without looking. He had hidden it behind a wall in a building so worthless, his own children would one day hand it to their mother as a cruelty. There was no safer place in all of Harlan Springs. She lifted the lid. Inside, laid flat, was a manila envelope, soft and furred at the edges from age, the kind of envelope a careful man keeps important paper in, and laid on top of the envelope, tied through its little hole with a loop of the same dirty string he had used on the front door key, was a brass tag and a key. A small flat brass key, the kind a bank gives you. The tag stamped into it, in letters worn but plain read SEC 14. She picked it up and turned it in the light. SEC 14. She had no notion in the world what it meant. She set it careful in her lap and took up the envelope, and unwound the little red string from its button, and inside were papers, a thick fold of them, and clipped to the front of them, all was a single sheet in Earl's own hand. His square, slow, careful hand, the same hand that had filled the first pages of the green ledger before his fingers got to shaking, and he gave the keeping of it over to her. She held it up to the window light, and she read what her husband had written her. Edie, if you are reading this, then I am gone on ahead, and you have done what I always knew you would do, which is keep this old place when nobody else would have it. I am sorry I could not tell you to your face. I tried to, near the end, but my words got away from me. So I am telling you here. You remember I told you I left you what is under the pumps, not the pumps. Here is what I meant, and I will say it plain so there is no mistake. The ground under this station, the oil, and the gas down deep in it, the mineral right to all of it, that belongs to us. To you now. It was sold off this land years back before ever I bought the corner, the way they sell off the deep part and keep the top. For a long time I did not have it. Then the year the wells came back in, over on the Pruitt lease, I went quiet to the man that held our minerals, and I bought them back, every acre under us. And I had it all set down and recorded proper at the county. I never told the children, I never told anybody. A man does one shrewd thing in his life if he is lucky, Edie, and this was mine, and I did it for you. The key in this box opens box number 11 at the First Farmers Bank in town. The recorded deed is in it, the real one, with the county seal on it. Take it to Dale Pruitt at the courthouse, and he will know it the second he lays eyes on it. For he is the one stamped it for me, and he never breathed a word either. The land they will see is described in the deed as Section 14. That is the count I meant. Count carefully, I told you. I meant Section 14. I meant do not let go of it. It is worth more than the house, Edie. More than the house and the car, and every dollar in the bank. All of it together. And then some, and it will keep on being worth it as long as the wells run. I did not want to leave you with worry. I wanted to leave you with this. Keep the feeder full for the cardinals. I am sorry about the dust. Your Earl. Edith Calloway sat back on the cold floor of the dead station and held that sheet of paper in two hands and did not move for a long time. Out front, through the dirty glass, she could see the cedar post he had set in concrete, the summer Wesley was born, and the empty feeder swinging on it, and the two cardinals fussing in the bare branches of the dead sign, waiting on her the way they waited every Sunday. The sun was going down red behind them, the whole flat Oklahoma sky catching fire with it, the light coming through the window, now the colour of a banked coal. She was not crying. She had thought she might, reading his hand after 3 years of nothing but a thermos she could not pour out, and a folded flag in a drawer. But the thing that came up in her was not grief, or not only grief. It was Earl, the whole of him, come back into the room and standing in the doorway the way he stood the day he caught her bringing the sandwich. She had patted his arm that day and told him to come in out of the wind. She had thought him a tired, soft old man, being sentimental about a corner of dirt. And the whole time he had been a man who saw what nobody else in this town saw, who went quiet to a stranger and bought back the deep, dark heart of his own land and set it down in his wife's name, and then nailed it behind a wall and let the world laugh at him for it. Let his own son call it junk to his face one day, never knowing. You let them think you were a fool, she said softly. You let me think it too. Oh, Earl. She understood now what she was holding. She had kept books for 41 years. She did not need a lawyer to tell her what a producing mineral right was worth against a paid-off house and a 3-year-old Buick. She had read the county's own number off Mr. Renner's page that very morning. $400 generous, he had said, for the whole worthless parcel. $400 on the surface they threw away, and underneath it, recorded and sealed and waiting in box number 11. The one thing the three of them had shoved across the table to be rid of. Tammy had borrowed $40,000 against a house. Wesley had put money down on a truck the size of a boat. They had spent against their inheritance before the ink was dry, certain to the bone that their mother had been handed the garbage and they had taken the gold. Edith folded Earl's letter back along its old creases, slow and careful, and slid it into the envelope with the rest of the papers, and she buttoned the brass key down into the pocket of her denim jacket beside the front door key, the pocket she had buttoned that morning so nothing would fall out on the drive home. She got herself up off the floor, a joint at a time, one hand on the counter, and she stood in the last of the light and looked at the open hollow in the wall, and the hammer lying where she had set it, and the grey steel box. Then she did the thing she had come out to do every Sunday for 15 years, because some things a person does not leave undone, no matter what kind of day it has been. She took the bag of seed from the shelf by the door and went out into the red evening and filled the feeder on Earl's cedar post until it spilled over, and the two cardinals dropped down to it before she had even stepped back, bold as you please. There, she told them. He didn't forget you. He didn't forget anybody. The bank would not open until Monday morning. Dale Pruitt would be at his window in the courthouse the same hour, the way he had been for 30 years. Edith Calloway stood in the gravel lot of Earl's Fuel and Service, with the envelope held against her chest and the brass key buttoned over her heart. And she looked a long while at the dark, dead sign that had not lit since the night shift boys were young. And for the first time in 15 years, she let herself wonder what it would take to make it shine again. Then she climbed up into the borrowed pickup, and she drove the 11 miles back toward town in the dark, in no hurry at all, because she had all the time in the world now, and Monday would come when it came. Monday came up grey over Harlan Springs, and then went gold. And Edith Calloway was awake to see all of it, because she had not slept much and had not minded. She had spent the night in the back bedroom of the little rented room she had taken on Sutter Street after the house went, a room with a borrowed cot and one window, and she had laid Earl's letter on the windowsill where the first light would find it, and she had read it through twice more before the sparrows started up. By 7 she had her hair pinned in its low bun and her denim jacket on, and the mustard scarf knotted at her throat the way she wore it every day of the world, and the brass key was buttoned in the pocket over her heart where it had ridden since Sunday evening, and the manila envelope with Earl's papers in it sat on the bench seat of the borrowed pickup beside her, and she drove the truck down off Sutter and onto the main street of town with both hands on the wheel and her chin level. First Farmers Bank sat on the square across from the courthouse, a square brick building with a clock in its face that had run 9 minutes slow since before Wesley was born. It opened at 9. Edith was parked out front of it at 20 of, sitting quiet in the cab with the heater ticking as it cooled, watching a young man in a tie unlock the glass doors from the inside and prop them and flip the little cardboard sign. She gave him 10 minutes to get his coffee and find his chair. Then she gathered the envelope to her chest and went in. The lobby was cool and smelled of carpet, and old money counted slow. A girl at the first window smiled at her. Edith asked, in the plain, steady voice she had used on the phone with vendors for 41 years, to see about a safe deposit box. And the girl walked her back to a desk where the young man in the tie sat under a brass lamp. And he stood and shook her hand and asked how he could help her this morning, ma'am. My husband kept a box here, Edith said. She set the brass key on the green blotter between them, the little dirty loop of string still tied through its hole, the stamped face of it turned up so he could read it. Number 11. Earl Calloway. He passed 3 years back. I believe I'm to have what's in it. The young man's face did a small, careful thing. The thing young men's faces do when an old woman has just handed them something they do not yet understand the size of. He picked the key up gentle and turned it over. Let me pull the card, Mrs. Calloway, he said. One moment. He went away into a back room and was gone longer than a moment. Edith sat with her hands folded on the envelope in her lap and looked at the framed picture on his desk of a lake, a different lake than the calendar at the station, and waited. When he came back, he had a grey ledger card in his hand and a look on him she could not quite read. Mrs. Calloway, he said, sitting, I want to make sure I've got this right because it's a little unusual. He laid the card around so she could see it. This box, number 11, has been rented continuously since 1996. There are 2 signatories on the card, Mr. Earl Calloway. He touched the line with his pen. And Mrs. Edith Calloway. That's you. That's me, Edith said. You've been on this box for going on 30 years. I never knew it, she said. I never set foot back there in my life. He looked at her, and then he looked at the card again, and something in him softened all the way through, the way it does in a young person when they brush up against a kind of love they have not lived long enough to have yet. The rent's a small thing, a few dollars a year, he said quietly. It's been paid every single year, right on time, by a standing order Mr. Calloway left with us in '96. It never lapsed, not the year he passed, not after. He set the pen down. Somebody made sure it would keep getting paid no matter what happened, so that whenever you came, it'd be here waiting for you. Edith looked down at her own name on that card in Earl's bank, written the year she had thought he was only shoring up a back wall against the damp, and she had to take one slow breath before she trusted her voice. $40 in property tax every spring, on a corner the world called junk. A few dollars a year on a box she never knew she owned. The man had spent his whole quiet life paying small certain sums to keep a door open for her, and never once told her the door was there. Then, I expect I'll see what's behind it, she said. They went together into the vault, the young man and the old woman, and he turned his bank key, and she turned Earl's brass one in the two locks of the long steel drawer, and he drew it out and carried it to a little private room, with a table and a single chair, and a door he closed behind her to leave her alone with it. She sat down. She lifted the lid. There was one thing in the box. A single document, folded once the long way, on heavy paper gone the colour of weak tea at the edges, the kind of paper they do not make for ordinary business. She lifted it out and unfolded it flat on the table, under the light, and she smoothed it with the side of her hand, and she read it. It was a deed. It was written in the long, stiff language of deeds, grantor and grantee, and the words to have and to hold, but she had kept books long enough to read past the language to the bone of a thing, and the bone of this was plain. It conveyed unto Edith Calloway, wife of Earl Calloway, all the oil, gas, and other minerals in and under a parcel of ground in Harlan County, Oklahoma. The parcel described down at the bottom, in the surveyor's cramped numbers, and there at the head of that description, where the law names a piece of the earth, were the words she had carried in her pocket, on a brass tag for one day and one night without knowing what they meant. Section 14. Down in the corner was the seal, a round impression pressed deep into the paper, and ink stamped over it, recorded and filed of record in the office of the county clerk of Harlan County, with a date and a book number and a page, and below all of it a clerk's signature, looped out in a hand, 30 years younger than the man who owned it now. She put 2 fingers on the seal and felt the cold dent of it in the paper, the realness of it, the weight of a thing that had been true and recorded, and waiting in the dark for 29 years, while her children grew up and grew greedy and divided the house. Count carefully, she said softly to the little room. Section 14. Oh, Earl. I counted. She folded the deed back along its one old crease and slid it into the manila envelope with the letter and the rest of the papers, and she sat a minute more with her hand flat on the envelope, and then she went back out and thanked the young man in the tie, and he walked her all the way to the glass doors and held one open for her and told her to take care now, Mrs. Calloway, and meant it. The Harlan County Courthouse was 100 steps across the square, a sandstone pile with a flag and a war memorial and a long flight of steps worn into shallow bowls by 90 years of feet. The recorder's office was on the first floor, down a hall that smelled of floor wax and old paper, behind a wooden counter polished by elbows. Behind the counter, at a desk stacked with plat books, sat a heavy old man in suspenders with reading glasses pushed up into white hair, and Edith knew him before he looked up, because Dale Pruitt had been sitting at that desk, or one just like it, since the both of them were young. Dale, she said. He looked over the tops of the glasses he wasn't wearing, and then he stood up faster than a man his size ought to, and his face came open. Edith Calloway, he said. Lord, I heard about Earl, and I'm ashamed I never got out to tell you so myself. I'm sorry, Edith. He was the best of us. He was, she said. She laid the manila envelope on the counter between them, and drew the heavy folded paper out of it, and unfolded it flat, and turned it around to face him, the same way the young man at the bank had turned the card around for her. And she watched Dale Pruitt's face while he read it. She watched it go from kindness to puzzlement to something else. something that made the old man go very still and reach up and settle his glasses down onto his nose at last with a hand that was not quite steady. He bent over the deed. He read it slow. He came to the seal in the corner, and the stamp, and the looping young signature beneath it, and he stopped there a long while. "Edith," he said. He did not look up. "Do you know what this is?" "I'm beginning to," she said. "I'd like to hear you say it." Dale Pruitt straightened up, and he took his glasses back off, and he laid one thick finger on the corner of the page, on the signature under the seal. "That's my hand," he said. "That's my signature right there. I recorded this deed myself. I remember the day, because Earl came in here in the dead of winter, must be near 30 years gone, and he didn't want a soul to know his business, and he stood right where you're standing, and he watched me stamp it, and book it, and file it. And then he shook my hand and asked me as a friend to keep my mouth shut. And I have. 30 years I never said a word. He turned to the long shelf of bound books behind him and ran his finger along the spines, and pulled one down, heavy as a paving stone, and laid it open on the counter and turned the brittle pages until he found it. He set the deed beside the book. The same words, the same seal. "It's recorded," he said, "book and page, right here in the county's own record. It's real, Edith, and it's been real and on file the whole time, and there is not one thing on God's earth anybody can do to undo it. This isn't a claim, it's recorded title." "To what's under the station," Edith said. "The minerals, the whole subsurface estate under Earl's Corner and the ground around it, Section 14. Dale Pruitt looked at her, and the old man's eyes were bright. "Edith, that's the same section the operator's been pulling out of since the Pruitt lease came back in. My own people get a check on the next section over, and it is not a small check. The surface up top, that cracked old lot with the dead pumps, that's worth about what a man'd pay for the scrap." He tapped the deed. "But this, the minerals under it, in production, with a royalty running every month the wells run. Edith, this is worth more than any house in this county. More than the house and a car and a bank account, and all of it stacked up together, and it keeps paying. Earl didn't leave you the pumps, he left you what's under them." The words landed in the quiet office exactly as Earl had said them to her on the porch one evening years ago, in his soft, worn voice, before she had any idea he meant a single thing by them. She put her hand flat on the cool sandstone counter to steady herself. And Dale Pruitt came around the end of it and stood beside her, this big old man in his suspenders, and did not say anything for a minute, and let her have it. "They took the house," she heard herself say. "Wesley and Tammy. They sat at that lawyer's table and split the house and the Buick and every dollar Earl and I saved, and they slid this across to me like they were doing me a kindness getting rid of it. Wesley's already put money down on one of those big English trucks. Tammy went and borrowed against her half of the house to tear up her kitchen. She gave a small laugh that had no bitterness in it, only wonder. They spent it, Dale. They spent it before the ink dried, because they were so sure they'd cleaned me out and stuck me with the trash." Dale Pruitt looked at the recorded deed lying open on his counter beside the county's own book, and then he looked at Edith Calloway in her denim jacket and her mustard scarf, and a slow, grim smile came up under his white moustache. "What do you aim to do?" he asked. Edith folded the deed once more along its crease, careful as anything, and slid it back into the envelope with Earl's letter, and buttoned the brass key down in her pocket, over her heart. And she thought about the lawyer's polished table on Mercer Street, where her son had brushed her inheritance across to her, like crumbs off a cloth. "I'd like to ask Mr. Renner to call us all back in," she said. "All three of us, the way we sat last week. I believe there's a paper or two still wants signing." She picked up the envelope and held it against her chest. "And I'd take it kindly, Dale, if you'd come down and bring the county's book with you, just in case anybody at that table needs to hear it, read out by the man that stamped it." Dale Pruitt was already reaching for his coat. "Mr. Renner could not get the three of them round his table again until Thursday, and Thursday came up cold and bright over Harlan Springs, and Edith Calloway climbed the narrow stairs of the old Fidelity building on Mercer Street, one careful step at a time, with the manila envelope held flat against her front, and Dale Pruitt coming up slow behind her with the county's big record book hugged under his arm like a family Bible. The conference room was the same one they had used to divide her life into thirds, the same long table with the lemon oil shine on it, the same green glass lamps, the same tall window looking down on Mercer Street, where a banner for the Spring Festival hung slack between two poles. Wesley was in it already when she came through the door, tipped back in the chair at the head of the table like he had paid for it, his phone laid face down by his elbow, and a paper cup of the lawyer's coffee going cold in front of him. And Tammy sat 2 chairs along with her sunglasses pushed up into her hair, working her thumb across her own phone, and neither one of her children stood up when their mother walked into the room. "Mama," Wesley said, and he did not trouble himself to look all the way up. "Renner said you wanted us back. We signed everything off. A week ago Tuesday, it's all done. Whatever this is, can we keep it short? I've got a thing at 2. "It won't take long," Edith said. She drew out the chair at the foot of the table, the same chair she had sat in the day they slid her a dead man's gas station, and called it her share. And she set the envelope down in front of her, and folded her hands on top of it. And she waited while Dale Pruitt came in behind her and set his heavy book down on the polished wood, with a flat sound that turned both her children's heads at once. Tammy's thumb went still. "Who's that?" she said. "To nobody." "This is Dale Pruitt," Edith said. "He keeps the records over at the Harlan County Courthouse. He's kept them near 40 years. I asked him to come and bring his book." Wesley's eyes went from the old man to the heavy ledger to his mother's folded hands, and something wary moved behind his face, the look of a man who came to sign a formality and found furniture in the room he had not ordered. "Renner," he said, turning to the lawyer, who had slipped in quiet and taken a chair against the wall. "What is this? We're done here. We closed it out." "Your mother asked for the meeting, Wesley," Renner said. "I'd let her have it." Edith opened the envelope. She drew out the one heavy folded paper, the deed gone tan and soft at its creases, and she unfolded it on the shining table, slow and careful, the way you open a thing that might tear. And then she stood up out of her chair, which she had not planned to do but found that she wanted to, and she leaned and set 2 fingers flat on the page and walked it the whole length of that table down to her son. She did it the way he had slid the station deed up to her the week before, only she did not turn it loose halfway and let it coast at him like something she was glad to be shut of. She carried it down under her fingers and set it square in front of him and stood there over his shoulder. "There's a paper here wants reading, Wesley," she said. "I'd be obliged if you'd read it out loud, and if the old words give you trouble, Dale will." Wesley pulled the page to him and bent his head over it, and Edith watched his eyes track down the stiff lines, watched his lips move a little, on the heirs and the assigns and the whereases and the forever. Watched the small frown come when he reached the part where the law names a piece of the ground. "This is some old deed of Daddy's," he said, and there was relief in it, the sound of a man who thinks he has found the bottom of a thing, mineral rights or some such. "Mama, these are a dime a dozen out in this country. Half of them aren't worth the ink. The leases all lapsed back before I could drive. Daddy had a whole drawer of dead paper like this." He pushed it an inch from him. "If this is what you brought us up here for, read him the section, Dale," Edith said. Dale Pruitt settled his glasses down onto his nose. He did not pick the deed up off the table. He laid one thick finger against it and turned it so the light fell right, and he read it out in the flat, unhurried voice of a man who has read 10,000 deeds aloud across a counter, the names and the date and the township and the range, and when he came to the section he said the number slow and let it lie there in the room. "Section 14, he said. "All the oil and the gas and the other minerals in that ground and under it, conveyed to Edith Calloway, her sole and separate property." He turned his own book around then, the county's record, open to the very same words, copied out in the very same hand, and he set the 2 side by side under the lamp. "I recorded this myself, the winter of '96. Your daddy stood at my counter in his work coat and watched me stamp it and book it. It has sat in this book every single day since, all the way through his passing, and right on up to this morning. The minerals under that corner were cut apart from the surface near 30 years ago, severed clean in the eyes of the law. The cracked lot up top with the dead pumps is one thing, and it's worth about what the scrap man would haul it off for. What lies underneath was always a separate thing, and it was deeded out by itself, to her, by name, a long time before any of you sat down to split anything." The room had gone very still. Out on Mercer Street, a truck rolled by with its radio up and faded off toward the highway. Tammy had set her phone down flat on the table and forgotten it was there. "Severed," she said. "Renner, what does that mean? What is he telling us?" Renner had come up out of his chair against the wall and was reading the deed over Dale Pruitt's shoulder, and Edith watched the lawyer who had run the meeting that emptied her out put one hand down flat on the table to steady himself. "It means," he said slowly, "that the mineral estate under that property was never any part of the estate we divided. It could not have been. It was already gone out of it, conveyed to your mother, in her name alone, while your father was still living. It was never on this table to give." He looked back down at the page as though he wanted it to read some other way. "And Section 14 is in production. That's the unit the operator brought back in 2 years ago. That is a producing section." "Producing?" Wesley said. "Royalty," Dale Pruitt said. "Every month the wells turn. My own people draw a cheque off the section that joins it, and it pays a long sight better than groceries." He closed his ledger gentle as a man closing a hymnal. "Wesley, that one piece of paper under your hand is worth more than the house and the Buick, and every dollar in those savings accounts laid end to end and counted twice. And it does not quit. It comes in every month. There is oil under Section 14, and there is a great deal of oil under Section 14. Nobody spoke. Edith stood at her son's shoulder and watched the two of them do the arithmetic. She had already done 3 nights running alone in the cab of a borrowed truck, watched it cross their faces, the way a cloud shadow crosses an open field. Tammy got there first, and her voice came out thin. "I borrowed against the house. I already had the kitchen torn out. Wesley, the cabinets are ordered. I signed the loan papers." She rounded on her brother. "And you put $10,000 down on that ridiculous truck on Saturday. You told me it was nothing. You sat right there and told me the station was a liability, that the buried tanks alone would cost more to dig out than the dirt was worth, that Mama would be lucky if the EPA didn't come down on her over it. You said we were doing her a kindness, taking the rest off her hands." "Hush, Tammy." But Wesley was not looking at his sister. He had turned in his chair to look up at his mother, where she stood in her old denim jacket, with the mustard scarf knotted under her chin, and Edith watched him smooth his whole face back over, watched the warmth come up into it again, the easy selling warmth he had worn at this same table the day he passed her the keys to her dead husband's garage. "Mama," he said, soft, and his hand came over hers where it rested on the back of his chair. "Mama, this is wonderful, you hear me? This is Daddy looking after every one of us. That's all this is. Family is family. We sat down once and split it all fair, and this just means we sit down and do it over. The whole of it, even shares, the way Daddy would have wanted. You don't want to be out here at 72 trying to run oil royalties by your lonesome. You wouldn't know where to start. Let me carry it for you. Let me look after you." Edith looked down at her son's hand closed warm over hers, the same hand she had once washed and held and prayed over in the dark, and she did not pull it back, and she did not give it one thing in return. "Wesley," she said, "I kept the books of your daddy's station for 41 years. I ran the payroll and the fuel tax and every vendor account with a pencil and a ledger, and I never came up $1 short. I have paid the $40 of property tax on that corner out of my own checkbook every spring for 15 years, the $40 not one of you would carry, and I've swept the floor of that office every Sunday of those 15 years so your daddy's place would not sit dirty. And in 15 years, neither one of you ever once asked me why I drove out there." She drew her hand back, slow, and folded it with the other one. "I expect I can manage a checkbook." Tammy was crying now, without any sound to it, the way a person cries over a thing they lost by handing it away themselves. "Mama, I'm sorry. We didn't know." "I know you didn't," Edith said, and there was no frost in it and no warmth in it either. Only the plain flat truth of it set down on the table. "Your daddy made good and sure you didn't. He knew his own children." She gathered the deed up and folded it back along its one soft crease and slid it into the envelope with Earl's letter, and she buttoned her jacket to the throat. "There is nothing here for Mr. Renner to do over," she said. "The house is yours, the two of you. Split it however you split it. The car has gone where it has gone. The money is spent, or it is not. That was yours to take and you took it, and I will not be asking back a nickel of it. And what your daddy left me is mine, and it is not coming to this table. Not today, and not in the will I mean to go and make. I will see you both at Christmas if you care to come. You can drive out to the station. You know the way. You gave it to me." She picked up the envelope and held it to her, and she walked out of that room and down the creaking stairs and out into the cold, bright noon of Mercer Street. And Dale Pruitt came down behind her with his book and stood with her by the truck and took his hat off the way men did when she and Earl were young. And that was the last time any paper of hers crossed that lawyer's table. It took the better part of the spring to open the station back up. There were tanks to be tested, and a pump to be made to turn over, and a county man to come out and put his name to all of it. And Edith paid for every bit of it, as the first royalty checks came in, and she did not buy herself a single new thing while she did. She left the rented room on Sutter Street for a small plain house, 4 blocks off the corner, and no farther, and every morning she let herself into the office she had already kept swept for 15 years, and set Earl's old green thermos on the counter by the register where his hand used to leave it, and she filled the bird feeder out in the lot before she did one other thing in the day. She put the Vance boy on to run the pumps, the oldest one, the one the refinery had turned out over the winter with a baby coming, and no other place in town that would take him on, and she set him on the books at a wage Earl would have paid and taught him the register herself. And when he tried to thank her, she told him to go see to the feeder and not to let it stand empty. The first morning gasoline ran again at Earl's corner, there were 11 cars off Old State Highway 9 before noon, and grey old men who had bought their fuel from Earl Calloway came and stood in the lot with their caps in their hands and laid their palms flat on the new pump. The last thing she saw to was the sign. She had a man drive over from Ardmore and run fresh wire up the rusted pole and fit new tube into the old dark letters that had spelled the name out over that corner of Mercer Road since before her children were big enough to reach the pedals. And on a Friday evening in May, with the Vance boy beside her and Dale Pruitt come out in his suspenders to see it, and a knot of old men standing bareheaded in the lot, Edith Calloway walked out to the grey box at the foot of the pole, while the dust came down blue over Harlan Springs, and she put her thumb to the switch. She pushed it up. The old letters caught and held, Earl's burning red over the lot again.